I've been driving a taxi for over 15 years now, mostly in Chicago, though I used to live and work in Las Vegas too. Back then, Uber and all these new rideshare apps weren't really a thing, or at least not something people used as often. The story I'm about to share happened years ago, but it still sticks with me like it just happened yesterday. For context, if you've never been to Chicago, winters here are brutal. Freezing temps, snow everywhere, just miserable. The taxi company I worked for wasn't the old-school yellow cab kind. This was one of those services where you use your own car and just slap a sign on the roof to let people know you're available. It was flexible. You worked when you wanted and charged what felt fair. They just took a cut of your earnings. At the time, it felt like the perfect setup, but good things never last forever. I didn't have a set schedule. I just hit the road whenever I felt like it. Around the holidays, though, I always worked longer hours. More people were out, which meant more money. Christmas was just another day for me since I didn't have family nearby and lived alone, so why not work? This particular Christmas Eve started off great. I hit the road around 10 a.m., and business was nonstop. I was pulling in close to $80 an hour, which was phenomenal. By 8 p.m., I'd been driving for 10 hours straight, but I didn't mind. Money was money. That's when the snow started coming down. It was light at first, so I figured I still had time before it got bad. I grabbed a quick bite at a fast food joint and got back to it. The streets were quieter now, and a lot of other drivers had called it a night, which meant less competition for me. I picked up a small group, dropped them off in a rougher part of town. Close, run-down houses packed together. They were nice enough, though, and even left a solid tip. As I was pulling away from the curb, I spotted a guy step out from behind a parked car. He threw up his hand, flagging me down for a ride. Through the snow and the dark, it was hard to make him out at first. He had a hoodie on and looked nervous, I guess, but that wasn't too unusual around here, so I pulled over. He climbed in, and I asked where he needed to go, but he didn't answer, not right away. I started driving down the street, waiting for him to speak up, but the silence felt off. So, I asked again, this time glancing in the rearview mirror. He finally made eye contact with me, just for a second, then looked away and mumbled something like, just take me here. He pulled a small scrap of paper out of his hoodie and handed it to me. The address was scribbled in barely legible handwriting, and I didn't recognize it at all, which was weird. I've driven all over Chicago for years, and I know pretty much every street, at least by name. This one didn't ring a bell. At a stop sign, I reached for my GPS, which I rarely ever used, and typed in the address. Nothing came up. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I double-checked the spelling, but no luck. Sir, I don't know where this address is, I said, turning slightly to face him. Without missing a beat, he snapped, yeah, just pull over here. His tone was sharp, too sharp, and it sent a chill down my spine. I had a sinking feeling about what was coming, but I stayed calm and pulled to the side of the road. The street was dead. No cars. No people. Not even a street light. Just silence. I shifted into park and kept my eyes forward, pretending nothing was wrong. He shifted too, glancing out the side window for a second. Then, in a flash, he lunged forward, pushing himself between the front seats. Before I could even react, he grabbed my head and jammed a gun against my skull. Give me your wallet. Your keys. Everything, he screamed. I froze. My mind went blank except for the sheer pain from the way he was grinding the barrel of the gun into my head. I tried to grab my wallet, but I must have been too slow because he got angry and smacked me in the back of the head with the gun. My vision blurred instantly, and my skull felt like it was splitting open. Dazed and terrified, I managed to toss my wallet onto the passenger seat. I thought that would be enough, but he hit me again. I don't even know why. Everything after that is a blur. The next thing I remember, I woke up on the side of the road. Snow was falling heavier now, covering me completely, and I was freezing. My car was gone. My wallet, keys, and phone. Everything gone. My head throbbed like it was going to explode, and I could barely stand. Shivering and stumbling, I forced myself to move through the snow-covered streets. Desperate to find help, I stumbled through the snow, trying to stay upright, my head still throbbing. It wasn't long before I saw the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance. The relief I felt in that moment was unreal. Somehow, I managed to drag myself to the door and explain what had happened to the attendant. They helped me call the police, and soon after, I got the help I needed. A week later, my car was found abandoned outside the city, dumped on the side of the road. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured, but the whole ordeal turned my life upside down. Losing my wallet, phone, license, basically everything, was a nightmare to replace. And without my car, I couldn't work, which meant no income for a while. But what sticks with me most is the unnecessary aggression. Like, if the guy had just asked for my stuff, I would have handed it over without any trouble. Why did he have to hurt me so bad when I wasn't even resisting? His goal wasn't to kill me, that much was clear. So why beat me senseless? That's what I still can't wrap my head around. After that, I decided to switch things up and started working for a bigger taxi company. They provided the car and everything, which honestly made me feel safer. I also stopped working nights and cut back on holidays. I learned the hard way that just because it's Christmas doesn't mean all the horrible people take the day off. That brings me to another incident. This one happened while I was out driving a delivery truck for my new job. It wasn't a cab gig this time, but the memory is just as terrifying. It was during a snowstorm, not a full-on blizzard, but more than just a light flurry. I'd been on the road for about 8 or 9 hours already, delivering pallets to a warehouse. I was ahead of schedule, so I wasn't in any rush. With the snow coming down, I figured it was best to take it slow anyway. The highway I was on was dimly lit, mostly empty, and I had my brights on to cut through the snowfall. That's when I noticed a flashing light up ahead. At first, it was faint, but as I got closer, it became a lot brighter, deep red, flickering in the distance. It didn't take long to realize it was a fire. The snow made it hard to tell if it was on the highway or off to the side, but I was closing in fast. I hit the brakes, thinking I had plenty of time to slow down, but I completely misjudged the distance. I pressed harder, and that's when the trailer behind me started to slide. My heart shot up into my throat as I let off the brakes, trying to regain control. The trailer straightened out, but not before shaking the entire truck like a rag doll. I thought for sure I was going to tip it or slide right into whatever was burning. When I finally got the truck to stop safely on the side of the highway, I looked out the passenger window at the tree line. Through the falling snow, I could just barely make out a small car completely engulfed in flames. I sat there for a moment, staring at the fire. I'd never seen anything like it up close. It wasn't like a crash or anything. The car looked almost normal, just sitting there, burning. That's what felt so off about it. I unbuckled my seatbelt, got out of the truck, and stood at a safe distance. I tried to look around for anyone who might have been hurt. Nothing. No one was in sight. I started worrying someone might still be inside the car, so I grabbed my phone and called the police. Luckily, I had just enough service to get through, but they said it'd be at least 15 minutes before anyone could get there. Standing there in the freezing cold, watching the flames, I couldn't help but think, this wasn't an accident. Something about it didn't sit right. The car was too intact, no dents, no skid marks, nothing to suggest a crash. It felt intentional, though I couldn't prove it. That's when I heard it, a voice calling out from behind me. "Hey, hold up." I turned around and saw 2 men walking toward me through the snow. They were maybe 30 feet away, both wearing face masks that covered their mouths and noses. My heart started pounding. I hadn't seen or heard a car pull up, and this was the middle of nowhere. There's no way they just walked here. I tried to keep my cool, greeting them casually and asking if they knew what happened. They both shook their heads, which only made me more suspicious. Something felt really, really wrong. I took a step back, saying, "Well, I'd better get back to my truck." "No," one of them said sharply, cutting me off. I froze, and when I turned back around, I saw the man closest to me had pulled a handgun. He aimed it right at me. "I'll do whatever you want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Move," he ordered, pointing toward the trailer. He shoved me up against the side of the truck and started patting me down aggressively. He took my wallet and phone while the other guy rummaged through the cab, grabbing anything he could find. I was trying so hard not to cry. All I could think about was my family and how this might be it for me. It hit me then, the burning car. I was almost certain they'd set it on fire. Maybe they'd robbed someone else before me, and, well, I didn't see anyone else around. so I could guess what happened to them. After what felt like forever, the second man walked over to the guy with the gun, whispered something in his ear, and just like that, they were gone. They disappeared into the dark, the snow swallowing them up. I stood there shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I stood there, frozen against the side of the truck, barely able to think straight. As soon as the men disappeared into the snowy dark, I bolted for my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. Once I climbed inside, I locked the doors and sat there, trying to catch my breath. Without my phone or wallet, there wasn't much I could do but wait for the police to show up. Those few minutes felt like hours, sitting in the cab, trying to convince myself I'd made it through the worst of it. When the cops finally arrived, I told them everything I could. Turns out, this whole thing became a big deal in the area. It took some time, but the police eventually pieced together what happened. The two men had, in fact, set that car on fire after robbing an older woman who'd been pulled over. Unfortunately, they killed her and burned the car to destroy any evidence. The men were caught not long after, and they even led the authorities to the woman's body. But what haunts me to this day is one question. Why did they come back? Was it just to rob me? If so, why take that kind of risk? And most of all, why let me live? Considering what they'd done to their last victim, I'm honestly lucky to still be here. Looking back, I'm grateful I survived, but the whole thing left its mark on me. If I could give anyone advice, it'd be this. If you ever see something suspicious like that, stay in your car. Lock the doors. Call the police. Don't try to help, because you never know how quickly the situation could turn on you. Now, let me tell you about another night that still doesn't sit right with me. Back in high school, I worked as a delivery driver for Domino's. It wasn't my only job. I did weekends at Jimmy John's too, but Domino's was my main gig. I wasn't new to the job either. I'd been delivering pizzas for a while, so I knew what I was doing. What happened this particular night, though? That wasn't normal. About 90% of the time, I didn't deal with the phone orders. Someone inside the restaurant would handle those, and I'd just grab the pizza and go. That night was no different. I just finished a delivery and ran back inside to grab the next order. As I was heading out, one of my coworkers said something that stuck out to me. He told me to make sure the guy pays in full. It was such an obvious thing to say, but the way he said it made it weird, like he had a bad feeling about this one. I didn't think too much of it at the time. The roads were snowy, and I was more focused on getting out of there safely. The delivery was only about 10 minutes away, and it was just after 10 p.m., so the streets were pretty empty. But as soon as I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a car speeding up behind me. At first, I figured it was just someone in a hurry, but they didn't pass me. Instead, they slowed down to match my speed. I couldn't tell what kind of car it was through the falling snow, but it wasn't uncommon for people around here to drive like maniacs at night when the roads were clear. Except tonight, the roads weren't clear. They were slick and dangerous. I stayed calm, driving casually, hoping they'd just pass me or turn off. Instead, they stuck with me until we hit a traffic light. That's when they pulled up into the lane next to mine. Normally, I avoid looking at other drivers at red lights. It saves me the awkward eye contact. But this guy was yelling, trying to get my attention. When I finally glanced over, he was staring right at me with his window rolled down. I quickly looked away and pretended I didn't notice him, messing with the pizza bag on the seat next to me to act distracted. But he kept yelling, waving his arm, and trying to get me to roll my window down. The second the light turned green, I floored it, not wanting to find out what he wanted. But he didn't stop. He sped up and kept pace with me, swerving all over the road. His window was still down, and I could see him constantly glancing over, like he was trying to catch my eye. He looked angry, really angry. I wasn't scared yet, just annoyed. But I wasn't about to pull over to talk to this guy. I thought about taking a side road to lose him, but with the snow piling up, I didn't want to risk getting stuck. So, I stayed on the main road and hoped he'd eventually give up. When I was about 2 minutes from the delivery address, he sped up and swerved directly into my lane. I slammed on the brakes, but my car started sliding. Luckily, his car had the same problem. He lost control completely, spinning off the road and into the thick snow. His car was almost turned completely around when it finally stopped. My heart was pounding as I slowly drove past, glancing in my mirrors to make sure he wasn't getting out. I felt bad leaving him there, but I wasn't about to stick around and see what he wanted. He'd already made it pretty clear it wasn't anything good. I finally pulled into the customer's driveway, grabbed the pizza, and knocked on the door. But no one answered. I waited, knocking and ringing the doorbell, but still nothing. I called my boss, who tried calling the customer. When he called me back, he told me the guy wasn't picking up. That's when it all started to click. I realized the guy in the car was probably the customer. His plan was to follow me from the shop, get me to stop, and rob me, either for the pizza, my wallet, or both. It explained why he wasn't home when I got there. He was still stuck in the snow. I didn't stick around to find out. I drove back to the shop, taking a different route just in case, and told my boss everything. He agreed with my theory and said he'd notify the police, giving them the guy's number and address. I never heard if anything came of it, but the guy never called the shop again. I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour diner just outside St. Louis. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and the regulars were usually harmless enough. Truckers passing through, late-night bar hoppers looking to soak up the booze, and the occasional college kid cramming for exams. But every once in a while, someone came in that set my nerves on edge. It didn't happen often, but when it did, you couldn't help but feel it in your gut. This happened about 6 years ago. It was mid-January, one of those freezing nights where the wind cuts through your coat no matter how many layers you're wearing. The roads were slick with ice, and the parking lot out front had turned into a skating rink. It wasn't exactly a busy night, but the regulars kept trickling in. One trucker who liked his coffee black and his hash browns extra crispy, a group of college kids laughing about something dumb, and an older couple sharing a plate of pancakes like it was their anniversary. It was around 2 a.m. when he came in. I noticed him right away because he didn't look like the usual crowd. He was tall, with greasy black hair that hung down over his face, and he was wearing this beat-up coat that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His jeans were dirty, and his boots were caked in slush. He didn't sit at a booth or the counter. Instead, he stood in the doorway for a moment, like he was deciding whether to come in at all. Then, without a word, he shuffled over to the corner booth, the one in the back by the bathrooms. I grabbed a menu and walked over, trying to be polite. "Hey there, can I get you started with some coffee?" He didn't respond right away, just stared down at the table, drumming his fingers against the sticky surface. Finally, he muttered, "Yeah, coffee's fine." His voice was low, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. I nodded, gave him the usual spiel about the specials, and headed back to the counter to grab the coffee pot. As I poured his cup, I caught my coworker Gina watching him from across the room. "Something's off about that guy," she whispered as I walked past. I shrugged it off. It's 2 a.m. Who isn't a little weird at this hour? But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. The guy never opened the menu, never touched the coffee I brought him. He just sat there, staring out the window at the dark parking lot. Every so often, I'd catch him glancing toward the front door, like he was waiting for someone, or something. After about 30 minutes, I decided to check on him again. "Everything all right over here?" I asked, forcing a smile. He finally looked up at me, and I swear, his eyes were the coldest I'd ever seen. "Do you lock the doors at night?" he asked, completely ignoring my question. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. No," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "We're open 24/7. He nodded slowly, like that was exactly the answer he was expecting. Then he leaned back in the booth and let out this low chuckle that sent chills down my spine. I walked away, trying not to think too much about it. Maybe he was just some drifter, harmless but odd. I've seen plenty of those over the years. Around 3 a.m., most of the other customers had cleared out. Gina was in the back cleaning up, and it was just me at the counter, refilling the salt shakers. That's when I heard it, the sound of tires crunching over the ice outside. I glanced out the window and saw a black van pulling into the parking lot. Its headlights were off, but I could just make out the outline of 2 men in the front seats. They didn't park near the entrance. Instead, they pulled around to the side of the building where the lights didn't reach. The guy in the booth must have seen it too, because he suddenly got up and started pacing near the bathrooms. His hands were stuffed into his coat pockets, and he kept glancing between the window and the front door, like he was nervous about something. I tried to keep my cool, but my heart was pounding. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. I headed to the back to grab Gina. "Hey," I said, trying to sound calm. "That guy in the corner is acting weird. And there's a van outside. I think we should call the cops." Gina peeked around the corner, took one look at the guy pacing by the bathrooms, and nodded. "Yeah, let's call." I grabbed the landline and started dialing, but before I could finish, the guy bolted toward the door. He yanked it open and disappeared into the freezing night. Gina and I looked at each other, unsure of what to do. "Should we lock the door?" she asked. Before I could answer, the front windows lit up with headlights. The van had pulled around to the front of the diner, its engine idling. That's when I saw him, the guy from the booth, standing in the parking lot, yelling at the van. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but his voice was angry, almost desperate. And then, just like that, the van sped off, tires screeching on the icy pavement. The guy stood there for a moment, watching it disappear into the night. Then he turned and walked back into the diner, his face pale and his hands trembling. "They're gone," he muttered, more to himself than to us. Without another word, he pulled some crumpled bills from his pocket, tossed them on the counter, and walked back out into the night. We never saw him again. To this day, I don't know who those men in the van were or what they wanted, but I'm pretty sure that guy in the booth knew. And whatever it wasn't good.